My brother Leo could charm the birds from the trees, and for most of his life, he'd been charming me into cleaning out the cages he left behind. He had our father's easy smile, our mother's sparkling green eyes, and a preternatural talent for making you feel like you were the most important, most interesting, most forgiving person in the world. That charm was his greatest gift, and it was the weapon he used to dismantle our lives, piece by piece. For years, I was his primary target, his chief enabler. I was the one who got the panicked 2 a.m. phone calls from a bar, his voice a slurred whisper of panic about a lost wallet. I was the one who would lend him $100 from my meager teacher's salary, knowing with a sick certainty it was destined to disappear onto a poker table. I was the one who would lie to our worried parents, spinning tailies about freelance jobs that were about to pay off, to explain why he needed yet another loan from them. I was his sister, his safety net, his cleanup crew. And I was tired. A deep, soul-crushing exhaustion had settled into my bones, the kind that comes from loving someone who is a black hole of need. It had all gotten so much worse since Mom died. Her passing 3 years ago left a silence in our lives that we all tried to fill in different ways. Our father, a quiet man to begin with, retreated further into the predictable world of his accounting firm. I buried myself in my 3rd grade classroom, finding a desperate kind of comfort in the steady, predictable rhythm of lesson plans and gold stars. Leo filled his silence with noise. The clatter of dice on a felt table, the whisper of cards being shuffled, the siren song of a long-shot bet that was always just about to come in. His gambling, once a weekend pastime with his buddies, had metastasized into a ravenous, insatiable hunger. And my family, in our grief and our desperate desire to keep him afloat, kept feeding the beast, hoping each sacrifice would be the last. Before she died, when the cancer had whittled her down to something fragile and bird-like, Mom gave me a heavy, cedar-lined box. She had me retrieve it from the top shelf of her closet, her hand too weak to lift it. "This is our story, Clara," she had whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. I'd sat on the edge of her bed, and we'd gone through it together. One last time. She'd held each item, telling me its history. Great-grandmother Eleanor's silver locket, tarnished and bearing the thumb-sized dent where it had stopped. A piece of shrapnel in a factory accident during the First World War. A Ziploc bag containing a handful of my own baby teeth, which she'd called her little pearls. My father's dog tags from his tour in Vietnam, and his father's, my grandfather's, Purple Heart from Normandy, the ribbon frayed, and the color of faded bruises. He had been wounded dragging 2 of his friends to safety, she'd reminded. M.E. It wasn't a medal for fighting. It was a medal for saving people. At the bottom was a stack of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. The first love letter my father ever wrote to her. His neat, accountant's handwriting suddenly sprawling and boyish with emotion. "Keep our story safe, Clara," she'd pleaded, her eyes locking onto mine with a desperate intensity. "Promise me. It's all we really have in the end." I promised her I would. After she was gone, I took the box to my own small apartment. I couldn't bear to look through it again. The grief was too raw. So I wrapped the box in a heavy quilt and hid it in the back of my bedroom closet, under a pile of old winter blankets. It was the safest place I knew. A place no one would ever look. I found out how wrong I was on a Thursday night in November. I'd stayed late at school for parent-teacher conferences, my head buzzing with conversations about reading, levels and playground squabbles. I walked into my apartment and the air felt wrong. Still, the normal, subtle sense of my life, books and coffee and chalk dust were overlaid with something else, a faint, acrid smell of nervous sweat and stale cigarette smoke. It was the smell of Leo, a wave of dread so intense. It made me dizzy, washed over me. I didn't stop to take off my coat. I walked directly to my bedroom, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I threw open the closet door and my hands tore at the sweaters and shoes, searching for the familiar weight of the blankets in the back. They were there, but they felt light, hollowed out. I pulled them away. The space beneath them was empty. The cedar box, our story, our history, my solemn promise to my dying mother was gone. I sank to my knees on the floor, the rough fibers of the carpet pressing into my skin. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just knelt there in the wreckage of my closet, a cold, sick certainty washing over me. There was only one person who knew I kept the box there. Only one person who still had a key to my apartment from a time when I'd still believed he could be trusted. Only one person so completely consumed by his own desperate hunger that he would resort to eating our memories. Leo. He hadn't just stolen some things. He hadn't just broken a promise. He had stolen the very foundation of who we were. He had stolen the story of us. And in that moment, something inside me, the soft, pliable, forgiving part that had always made excuses for him, finally calcified into something hard and sharp and utterly unbreakable. This was not another mistake I could clean up. This was not another debt I could pay. This was the final betrayal. This was a declaration of war. The drive to his apartment was a blur of red taillights and righteous fury. He lived in a shabby, low-slung building across town that always smelled of damp and despair. I pounded on his door, my knuckles striking the cheap peeling wood. When he opened it, he was already wearing his mask, the charming, slightly confused smile. "Clara, hey, what's up? A little late for a social call, isn't it?" His attempt at nonchalance was pathetic. The smell of him, of his panic, was clinging to the air in my own apartment. "The box, Leo," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It was flat and cold and heavy. "Where is it?" The mask held for a second longer. His eyes widened in a parody of confusion. "The box? What box?" "Clara, I honestly have no idea what you're talking about." He was so good at it. Years of practice had honed his lies into a reflex. But I saw it. The slight tremor in his hand. The way he couldn't quite meet my eye. "Don't," I said, and the single word was filled with so much compressed rage that he flinched. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not today. Not about this. Mom's box. The cedar box from her closet. It's gone from my closet. And you are the only other person on this planet with a key." I watched the lie die in his eyes. He looked down, his shoulders slumping, the charming charade dissolving to reveal the weak, frightened man underneath. "I was going to tell you," he mumbled to the grimy floor. "I swear. I was going to get it back before you even noticed. I just needed—" "You needed what?" I pressed, stepping into his apartment, forcing him to back away. The place was a disaster. Takeout containers and overflowing ashtrays everywhere. "You needed what so badly that you sold our family. You don't understand," he shouted, the defensive anger flaring up. It was always his last resort when the charm and the lies failed. I was in trouble, Clara. Real trouble. I owed money to some very bad people. They were going to hurt me. I had to get cash fast. "So you went to our mother's memory box," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You took our grandfather's medal for saving his friends and you sold it to save yourself from a bookie. You sold the locket that survived a war. You sold the letters our father wrote to our mother when they were young and in love." He had the grace to look ashamed, but it was fleeting. "It's just old junk, Clara," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "It's not like it was worth that much money. I didn't get nearly enough. It's not like it was worth much." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. He had weighed our history on a scale and found it wanting. He had looked at the tangible evidence of our family's love, sacrifice, and survival, and saw only a disappointing dollar amount. He didn't get it. He was fundamentally incapable of getting it. The black hole of his addiction had consumed everything, including his own heart. "Where, Leo?" I demanded, my voice low and intense. "Which shops? Give me the receipts. Tell me now." He shook his head, retreating into a sullen silence. "I don't remember. A bunch of places. I was in a hurry. I got rid of it. It's gone. Can we just drop it?" I said I was sorry. I looked at my brother, at the stranger standing in the wreckage of his life, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. The love I had felt for him, the fierce, protective instinct had been burned away. All that was left was the hard, unyielding truth of what he had become. I turned my back on him without another word and walked out of the apartment. I didn't slam the door. I closed it quietly, gently, the way you close a door on a room you never intend to. Enter again. My search began the next day. I told the principal at my school I was taking a week of personal leave for a family emergency. It was the truth. My family was an emergency. I created a grid map of the city and its surrounding suburbs, and I started a grim pilgrimage. Every pawn shop, every jewelry exchange, every seedy cash for gold storefront became a stop on my Via Dolorosa. The first few were the hardest. I'd walk in, my small photo album clutched in my hand, and face the indifferent, suspicious gaze of the person behind the counter. "I know this is a long shot," I'd begin, my voice trembling slightly, "but some family items were stolen from me, and I'm trying to track them down." I'd show them the pictures. Most would give the photos a cursory glance before shaking their head, their eyes already looking past me to the next potential customer. "Sorry, lady. Haven't seen it." Each dismissal was a small death, another confirmation that the pieces of my past were gone for good. By the third day, I had developed a hard shell. My presentation became brisk, efficient. I didn't show emotion. I treated it like a police procedural. "I'm looking for these specific items," I'd say, laying the photos on the counter. A 1910 silver locket, a World War II Purple Heart, a set of 1960s U.S. Army dog tags. I learned to read the flicker in their eyes, the subtle shift in posture that told me if they were lying or just indifferent. Most were indifferent. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, in a cluttered, dusty shop in an industrial part of town I rarely visited. The place smelled of old metal and decay. The man behind the counter was old and wheezing, with watery eyes and nicotine-stained fingers. His name, according to a grimy plastic name tag, was Sal. I went through my spiel, expecting nothing. He squinted at the photos, pushing his glasses up his nose. He grunted when he saw the picture of my grandfather's Purple Heart. "Yeah, I remember this," he rasped, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Came in, maybe 3 weeks ago. Military stuff like this, it's got a specific market. I don't sit on it long." My heart, which had been a dead weight in my chest for weeks, gave a painful lurch. "Do you remember who sold it to you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly would shatter this fragile moment of hope. He shrugged, picking at a loose thread on his sweater. "Some kid. Looked like he was running from a ghost. Sweating, even though it was cold out. Shifty eyes. Couldn't wait to get the cash and bolt. It was a perfect portrait of Leo. I don't know his name. He's not a regular." My shoulders slumped. It was so close, yet still a dead end. "But you sold it?" I asked, the hope already draining away. "Yeah," he said, looking at me with a surprising flash of pity in his watery eyes. He seemed to understand that this was more than just a stolen object. "Look, kid, I got a guy who buys this stuff from me. He's a collector. A little eccentric. Calls himself the Colonel. Specializes in military memorabilia. He saw the desperate, pleading look on my face. He sighed, a long, rattling sound that turned into a cough. He tore off a corner of a newspaper and scribbled a name and a phone number on it with a stubby pencil. Donnie the Colonel Martino. He runs a little antique store at the flea market out by the highway on weekends. Tell him Sal sent you. Maybe he'll talk to you. He pushed the scrap of paper across the counter. Now, get out of here, you're bumming me out. I clutched that greasy piece of paper in my hand, as if it were a winning lottery ticket. It was a thread. A fragile, tenuous thread, but it was enough to lead me out of the labyrinth. I knew I couldn't just call this Colonel. I couldn't confront him alone. I needed someone with a badge. I needed the weight of the law behind me. That afternoon, I walked into the city's central police precinct. My hands were trembling again, but this time it was with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. I sat across a metal desk from a detective named Miller. She had a tired face but kind, intelligent eyes. I told her my story, but I told it carefully. I reported a burglary. I told her my apartment had been entered while I was at work, and a box of valuable family heirlooms had been stolen. It wasn't a lie. It was just a carefully edited version of the truth. Omitting Leo's name was an act of self-preservation. This couldn't be a family squabble. It had to be a crime. I gave her the detailed list of stolen items. I gave her the insurance appraisals I had for a few of them. And then I slid the greasy scrap of paper across the desk. I've been doing some asking around on my own, I said, my voice cool and steady. And a source told me that this man, Donnie Martino, might have recently purchased the Purple Heart Medal. Detective Miller picked up the paper and looked at me, her gaze sharp and assessing. She knew there was more to this story, that my source was likely a pawn shop owner I shouldn't have been talking to. But she also saw the cold, hard determination in my eyes. She saw that I wasn't just another hysterical victim. I was a credible witness with a viable, actionable lead. She nodded slowly. "We'll look into it, Miss Jensen," she said, her voice all business. "I'll be in touch." I walked out of the police station into the cold November air, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I had set a heavy official machine in motion. I had no idea where it would lead, but I knew with every fiber of my being that it was leading away from the helplessness and despair that had been my home for too long. As I got to my car, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was strained, on the verge of cracking. "Clara, we need you. Your mother and we can't do this alone. We've finally decided. We're going to stage an intervention for Leo. We hired a professional. It's this Sunday, at the house, at 2:00. Please, honey. You have to be there. You're the only one he might actually listen to." A cold, terrible, and perfect sense of calm washed over me. An intervention. A controlled environment. The whole family, all the key players, the victim and the enablers, gathered in one room. It was the perfect stage. Not just for their emotional appeals, but for the consequences I had just set in motion. "Yes, Dad," I said, and my own voice sounded strange and distant to me, as if it were coming from someone else, someone much colder and much stronger. "I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The call from Detective Miller came on Friday afternoon. I was in my classroom, grading papers, the scent of crayons and disinfectant a comforting balm. I saw her number and stepped out into the empty hallway to answer it. Her voice was crisp, professional, but I could hear a trace of satisfaction. "Beneath the surface, Ms. Jensen, I wanted to give you an update on your case," she began. "We paid a visit to Mr. Donnie Martino at his place of business. At first, he was uncooperative. But when faced with the possibility of a charge for trafficking in stolen goods, he became much more forthcoming. I could almost hear her smile. He did indeed purchase the Purple Heart Medal about 3 weeks ago. He kept a detailed, albeit private, log of his acquisitions. She paused for effect. He was able to provide us with the full name and a surprisingly clear security camera photo of the young man who sold it to him. An individual named Leo Jensen. My breath caught in my throat. It was real. The thread had held. And the medal? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's been recovered. We took it from Mr. Martino's display case ourselves. It's been logged into the police evidence locker. Once the case is closed, it will be returned to you. Her voice became more formal. Based on the confirmed sale of the stolen item, we now have more than enough to issue a warrant for your brother's arrest. Given the value of the items on your list, the charge will likely be felony theft. A felony. The word hung in the air, heavy and cold and real. For a moment, a wave of nausea and doubt washed over me. My brother, a felon. Was this what I really wanted? Then I thought of my mother's face, of my grandfather's sacrifice, of the empty space in my closet. Yes, this was what I wanted. This was what he had earned. Thank you, detective, I said, my voice firm again. I appreciate everything you've done. Standard procedure is that we'll execute the warrant early next week, she continued. We'll pick him up at his last known address. Unless, of course, we receive any specific information on his whereabouts before then. It was a professional courtesy. An opening. She was giving me a choice. I took a deep breath. Actually, detective, I said, the words coming out cool and even. I can tell you exactly where he will be this Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The intervention was everything I had dreaded and more. The living room of my childhood home felt like a courtroom and a funeral parlor all at once. My parents sat on the sofa, their faces drawn and grey with a grief so profound it seemed to have aged them 10 years in a month. My Aunt Patty, my mother's sister, sat beside them, a box of tissues already in her lap, her eyes red and puffy. In a wing-back chair sat Dr. Miles, the professional interventionist my parents had hired. He was a man with a soft, therapeutic voice and a clipboard, a combination I found deeply unnerving. And in the center of the room, in an armchair, they had deliberately isolated from the rest of us, sat Leo. He was wearing a clean shirt, but he looked terrible. His skin was sallow, his eyes were bloodshot, and he radiated an aura of sullen, cornered resentment. He refused to look at me. The shame was a palpable thing, a toxic cloud in the room, but it was a selfish shame, the shame of being caught, not the shame of his actions. The process began, orchestrated by Dr. Miles's gentle, persistent voice. One by one, we were to read our letters. My father went first. His hands trembled as he unfolded his piece of paper. His letter was a rambling, heartbreaking plea, full of memories of Leo as a little boy, a sunny, happy child who could hit a baseball farther than anyone in the neighborhood. Where did that boy go, son? He asked, his voice cracking. I just want my son back. My mother followed, her voice a choked whisper as she read about the sleepless nights, the constant, gnawing worry, the fear that one day the phone would ring with news she couldn't bear to hear. I feel like I'm losing you, Leo, she sobbed. And I can't lose you. I already lost my best friend. Aunt Patty just cried her way through a few disjointed sentences about how much his mother had loved him. Through it all, Leo just sat there. He stared at his hands, his face a perfect mask of bored indifference. He was a stone at the bottom of a river, letting the current of their grief and love and pain just wash over him, knowing that eventually it would recede, and he would still be there, unchanged. He was weathering the storm, just as he had weathered 100 other storms of their making. This was nothing new. This was just another Sunday afternoon of disappointment. Then, it was my turn. "Clara?" Dr. Miles said, his gaze turning to me. "Would you like to share your letter?" I stood up. The movement was sharp and it drew every eye in the room. Leo finally looked at me, a flicker of something defiance, maybe even hatred in his tired eyes. He saw that I wasn't holding a letter. "I didn't write one," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was clear and calm and carried through the silent, emotionally charged room like a bell. "I'm done with words. I have used up every word I have on you, Leo. I've begged you. I've pleaded with you. I've screamed at you. None of it has ever mattered. I looked from my brother to my parents, to my weeping aunt. Our words don't work. They're meaningless. In fact, they're worse than meaningless. Our love, our tears, our endless support. You've twisted it. You've used it as a currency to buy more chances. It's become the safety net that lets you keep falling without ever getting hurt." "Clara, this is not a productive approach," Dr. Miles began, his therapeutic calm finally showing a crack. "We're here to express our feelings in a safe. I cut him off, a harsh, humorless laugh escaping my lips. "Nothing about this is safe. My brother is killing himself, and you think the solution is to talk about our feelings? No. This is the most productive thing that has happened in this family in years." I turned my gaze back to my brother, who was now staring at me, his mouth slightly agape. "I do love you, Leo," I said. And I meant it with a ferocity that scared me. "I love you so much that I am willing to do what nobody else in this room has the courage to do. I am willing to finally, actually let you get hurt. I'm willing to let you hit the bottom. A real bottom, made of concrete and consequences. A bottom you can't charm or lie or cry your way out of." Just as the last word left my mouth, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, loud, and utterly alien in the fragile atmosphere of the room. Everyone looked at the door, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Everyone but me. A profound, terrible calm settled over me. I walked across the room, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floor, and opened the front door. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the welcome mat. Their faces were impassive, their presence solid and uncompromising. "Ma'am?" the taller one said, his eyes flicking past me to the stunned group in the living room. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Leo Jensen." The silence that followed was a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked all the air and emotion out of the room. It lasted for 3 full seconds. Then, my mother's scream tore it apart. It was a sound of pure animal anguish, a sound I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. My father, who had been frozen in place, rushed towards the officers, his hands raised placatingly. "There must be some mistake," he stammered, his face a ghastly shade of grey. "This is my son. He's a good boy. There's been a misunderstanding. Is your son Leo Jensen?" the officer asked, his voice a flat, unimpressed monotone. He wasn't looking at my father. He was looking at my brother. Leo was still in the armchair, his face a mask of chalky white shock. He looked from the officers to me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. "You," he breathed, the word a puff of air. "You did this." Dr. Miles, the interventionist, finally found his voice. "Officers, I am Dr. Miles, and this is a confidential therapeutic session," he said, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I must insist that you wait outside." The second officer just looked at him. "Sir, this is a felony warrant. We're not waiting." He and his partner stepped into the room, their presence immediately changing the dynamic from a family drama to a crime scene. They moved towards Leo, their movements economical and practiced. "Leo Jensen?" the first officer repeated. "You need to stand up and place your hands behind your back." That's when the full force of my mother's rage broke. Over me. She flew at me, grabbing the front of my shirt, her face contorted with a fury I had never seen. "Clara, what have you done?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "He's your brother. Your brother. You don't do this to family. You don't call the police on your own blood. I am doing this for my family," I shouted back, my own voice raw with a pain so deep it felt like it was tearing me in two. "I am doing this because you are all going to love him into an early grave. Don't you see? This is the real intervention." The officers had reached Leo now. He stood up slowly, a puppet whose strings had been cut, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. They turned him around, and the sound of the handcuffs clicking into place was unnaturally loud, a sharp metallic finality that echoed in the silent room. It was the sound of rock bottom. It was the sound of the end of the world as we knew it. As they led him towards the door, his eyes met mine one last time. The charming smile was gone. The glib defiance was gone. The sullen resentment was gone. All I saw in his eyes was a raw, naked, and absolute sense of betrayal. And for the very first time in his life, a flicker of genuine, paralyzing fear. The kind of fear that can, sometimes if you're lucky, be the beginning of everything else. The moment the front door closed behind them, cutting off the squawk of the police radio, the dam of my family's grief and shock broke, and it all came flooding towards me. "Get out," my father whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. He wouldn't look at me. He had sunk onto the sofa and was staring at the door his only son had just been led through in handcuffs. "Just get out of my house. Now." "Dad, please, you have to understand," I started, my own tears finally beginning to fall. "Understand what?" My mother screamed, her face a mess of tears and fury. "That you hate your brother so much you would see him in a prison cell. That you were so cold, so vengeful, so heartless, that you would destroy this entire family over some old, dusty junk." The word junk was the final match on the gasoline. It wasn't junk. I yelled, the words tearing from my throat, raw and ragged. It was our history. It was our mother's memory. It was our grandfather's courage. And he sold it for nothing. For the thrill of a bet. And none of you have ever, not once, held him accountable for anything. Every time he fell, you rushed to cushion the blow. Every mess he made excuses and I cleaned it up. We are the ones who built the cage of his addiction, piece by piece, with our endless, suffocating forgiveness and our blind, stupid love. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that was more frightening than my shouting. You were all in here today to talk, to cry, to beg him to be a good boy. You were trying to save him from having a bad day, and trying to save him from dying. And I will not apologize for that. I looked around at their stunned, horrified faces. I saw no understanding, no flicker of recognition. In their eyes, I was the monster. I was the one who had destroyed everything. I was utterly, completely alone. I had detonated a nuclear bomb in the heart of my own family. And I was the only one left standing in the radioactive wreckage. I turned without another word and walked out of the house, the sound of my mother's heartbroken sobbing following me all the way to my car. The silence in the aftermath was a living entity. My parents, as good as their word, cut me off completely. My calls went to a voicemail box that was perpetually full. My texts were green bubbles of unanswered hope that eventually faded to grey resignation. In their grief-stricken narrative, I had become the villain, the unnatural. daughter who had betrayed her own blood. I was a pariah. I spent my evenings alone in my apartment, the silence amplifying the echo of my mother's screams and the final, metallic click of the handcuffs. There were moments, in the dark, lonely hours before dawn, when I wondered if they were right. If I had been too cruel, too unforgiving. If I had broken something that could never be repaired. Leo's journey through the court system was swift and impersonal. I followed it through public records, a detached observer of my own brother's fate. Faced with the evidence from the pawn shop dealer and Detective Miller's thorough report, he had no defense. His court-appointed lawyer, a shrewd and pragmatic woman, managed to broker a deal. The prosecutor, seeing a young man with no prior convictions and a clear, diagnosable addiction, offered a choice: a 2-year minimum sentence in state prison, or entry into a year-long intensive inpatient drug and alcohol rehabilitation program, a place notorious for its strict, no-nonsense approach, to be followed by 3 years of stringent probation, including mandatory drug testing and restitution payments. It was a choice between a cage of steel and a cage of discipline. He chose rehab. The legal system had, in its slow, grinding way, done what my family never could. It had presented him with a consequence that had teeth. The first crack in my parents' wall of silence came not from them, but from Dr. Miles, the interventionist. He called me about 2 months after the arrest, his voice humbled and thoughtful. "I owe you an apology, Clara," he said. "I've been facilitating family therapy sessions with your parents as part of Leo's program. The counselors there, they're very good. They helped your parents begin to see their own roles in Leo's illness, the patterns of enabling, the codependency. They're starting to understand that what you did, as shocking and unorthodox as it was, came from a place of profound love, a desperate, tough kind of love. They're not there yet, but they're starting." A week later, my father called. The sound of his voice after so long made my knees weak with relief. He sounded tired and sad, but the raw anger was gone. "We were wrong," he said, the words clearly costing him a great deal of pride. "All those years, we thought we were helping him. We were so focused on protecting him from the world. We forgot we needed to protect him from himself. I still don't know if I can ever forgive you for the way you did it, Clara, for the shame of it. That I am, finally, starting to understand why." The letters from Leo began arriving a month after that. They came once a week, part of his therapy. The first one was a single page, filled with furious, rambling accusations, blaming me for ruining his life. The second was steeped in a cloying self-pity, a long, whining complaint about the rigors of the program and the injustice of it all. I read them both and didn't respond. I put them in the empty cedar box, which the police had recovered from the first pawn shop and returned to me. Then the third letter came. It was a single sheet of paper, with 3 words written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. It looked like the handwriting of a child just learning to hold a pencil. "You were right." I held that piece of paper to my chest and cried. Not tears of rage or grief, but of a fragile, heartbreaking, and terrifying hope. A year after the intervention, Leo was released. He didn't come home. He moved into a sober living house on the other side of the state, a place with strict rules and a mandatory curfew. He got a job washing dishes at a diner, the same kind of job I had worked in high school to save for a car. He went to meetings every single day. He called me once a week on Sundays. The conversations were awkward, stilted. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the weather, about his job, about the steps he was taking, one day at a time, to stay clean. A portion of his meager paycheck was automatically garnished and sent to me every month. A slow, methodical restitution. It wasn't about the money. It was about the act of atonement. I never recovered all the items from the box. The Purple Heart, returned from the police evidence locker, now sits on my mantelpiece, a constant, silent reminder of what is worth fighting for. The locket, the letters, the dog tags. They are gone forever, lost to the currents of the city. For a long time, I mourned their loss. But I have come to realize that I didn't fail my mother. The things in the box were just symbols of our story. The real story, the one that matters, is the one we are living now. It's a messy, painful, and unfinished story of a family that was shattered into 1,000 pieces, but is now, slowly, carefully, one day at a time, trying to rebuild. Not on the old, rotten foundation of secrets and lies, but on a new, stronger foundation of brutal honesty, hard-won sobriety, and the kind of fierce, difficult love that is brave enough to burn everything to the ground in order to save one of its own. Of course, I will continue the story, expanding on the aftermath and the family's difficult journey toward a new kind of normal. The year that followed, Leo's release from rehab, was the longest and quietest of my life. The weekly phone calls became our new, fragile ritual. They were exercises in navigating a minefield of unspoken words. We'd talk about the weather, about the sitcoms our parents were watching, about the tedious details of his job. Washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner called the Corner Pocket. We talked about everything except the gaping crater he had left in our lives. The cedar box, the intervention, the arrest. These things lived in the silence between our sentences. I learned that his sobriety was a moment-to-moment struggle, a constant, conscious effort to not fall back into the abyss. I was proud of him, a distant, cautious kind of pride, but the trust was gone. The easy intimacy of being siblings had been another casualty of his addiction. My own healing was a parallel journey, just as quiet and just as difficult. On the advice of Dr. Miles, I started attending Al-Anon meetings in a church basement across town. I sat in a circle of strangers' wives, husbands, parents, and siblings of alcoholics and addicts, and I listened. I heard my own story, echoed in theirs. I heard the familiar language of excuses, of lies, of midnight fears and depleted bank accounts. For the first time, I understood that I wasn't just a victim of Leo's choices. I was a participant in the family disease of enabling. I learned about boundaries, not as weapons, but as acts of self-preservation. I learned that forgiveness wasn't a single grand gesture, but a slow, painful process of letting go of the hope for a better past. In that musty basement, surrounded by the quiet, resilient strength of people who, like me, had been scorched by the fire of someone else's addiction, I began to piece myself back together. The restitution checks arrived every month, a paper reminder of his debt. I never spent the money. I opened a separate savings account, and the balance grew. A small, sad monument to what he had sold. It felt like blood money, and I had no idea what to do with it. 6 months into his new life, during one of our stilted Sunday calls, Leo's voice was different. It was tight with a nervousness I hadn't heard before. "Clara," he started. I was wondering, my next check, could I maybe give it to you in person? I could buy you a cup of coffee. At a diner. Not mine," he added quickly, a flash of his old humor. "The coffee at my place is terrible." My first instinct was a visceral no. The thought of sitting across from him, of seeing the face that had haunted my waking and sleeping hours, was terrifying. The phone calls were safe. They were contained. But then I thought of the women in my Al-Anon group, who spoke of the courage it took to face the wreckage. "Okay, Leo," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Coffee would be nice." We met at a generic, brightly lit diner, halfway between my apartment and his sober living house. I got there first and chose a booth in the back, needing a solid wall behind me. When he walked in, my breath caught. He was thin, much thinner than I remembered. The charming sparkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out weariness. But he was sober. His eyes were clear. It was the first time I had truly seen my brother, the man without the addictions, mask in almost a decade. The conversation was excruciatingly awkward. We stirred our coffees. We talked about the terrible wallpaper in the diner. We commented on the rain. Finally, he slid a crumpled envelope across the sticky tabletop. It was his monthly restitution payment. "Thanks," I said, taking it. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of everything we weren't saying. "I've been trying, you know," he said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the salt shaker he was turning over and over in his hands, "to find the other things in my spare time. I go to pawn shops, I check online marketplaces. It's one of my steps, making amends. A tangible amends." He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a shame so profound it was almost hard to look at. "I haven't found anything. Everything is just gone. I'm so sorry, Clara. I am so sorry." It was the first time he had apologized without it being followed by an excuse. It was a simple, stark admission. I just nodded, unable to speak. He reached into the pocket of his worn jacket. "But I did find one thing," he said, his hand trembling slightly. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased with age. He pushed it across the table. "It was in my wallet this whole time. I didn't sell it with the rest. I don't know why. Maybe even in the middle of all that, there was a part of me that knew I couldn't sell this." I unfolded the paper. It was the letter. The first love letter my father had ever written to my mother. His familiar, neat handwriting, suddenly sprawling and boyish, filled the page. "My dearest Sarah," it began. I stared at the words. The ink faded, but the love still so palpable it felt warm to the touch. This was the heart of the collection. The origin story. The one piece I had mourned more than any other. I looked up at my brother, my vision blurring with tears. He was crying too. Silent tears tracking down his thin cheeks. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a magical fix. It was just a moment. A single, fragile moment of shared grief and the barest, most tentative glimmer of hope. It was the first stone being laid on a new foundation. That letter changed everything. It didn't erase the past, but it made the present feel possible. Our phone calls became a little easier. We started talking about the memories associated with the heirlooms, not just the loss of them. We talked about Mum. It was painful, but it was a clean pain, the kind that comes with setting a broken bone. It was the pain of healing. The real test came with Thanksgiving. It was my mother who called, her voice full of a nervous hope that broke my heart. "We were thinking, just a small dinner this year. Just the four of us. Leo's sponsor thinks it would be a good step for him. If you're comfortable with it, Clara." Was I comfortable with it? No. The thought of being in that house, in that room where it had all imploded, made my stomach clench. But I knew it was a necessary step for all of us. "I'll be there," I said. Thanksgiving Day was a masterclass in tension. My mother overcompensated by being unervingly cheerful, her voice a high, bright sound in the quiet house. My father kept himself busy, carving the turkey with an almost surgical precision. Leo was quiet, helpful. He cleared plates, he refilled water glasses. He did everything he could to make himself small, to take up less space. I was watchful, my senses on high alert, waiting for a crack in the fragile peace. The moment came just before dinner. A well-meaning uncle, who had stopped by to drop off a pie, saw Leo and beamed. Leo, my boy. Good to see you. Can I get you a beer? He boomed, already heading for the fridge. The air froze. My parents looked at each other. In panic. It was the kind of innocent, thoughtless trigger that could send a recovering addict into a tailspin. I saw a flicker of the old, cornered panic in Leo's eyes. He looked at me just for a second, and in his gaze I saw a plea. Help me. The old Clara would have jumped in, would have made an excuse for him, would have smoothed it over. The new Clara stayed quiet. I held his gaze and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. You can do this. It was his test, not mine. Leo took a deep breath. No, thank you, Uncle Jim, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I'm not drinking today. Our uncle, confused but amiable, just shrugged. Suit yourself, kiddo. He grabbed a beer for himself and the moment passed. But for us, for the four of us in that kitchen, it was a seismic event. Leo had held his boundary. He had saved himself. Dinner was still awkward, filled with long silences and overly polite requests to pass the salt. But something had shifted. It was no longer the tense, brittle peace of earlier. It was something more solid. Something real. Later, as I was getting ready to leave, I stood for a moment. In front of the fireplace mantel, the purple heart sat there, polished and proud, right where it belonged. Leo came and stood beside me. We looked at it together in silence for a long time. I'm sorry about the rest of it, he whispered, his voice thick. I'll never stop being sorry. I know, I said. I finally turned to look at him. Mum didn't want us to keep the things, Leo. She wanted us to keep the story. And maybe this is just part of the story now. The part where we almost lost it all. He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. And the part where you saved it, he said. And me. I drove home that night feeling a sense of closure that was deeper than I had ever thought possible. The empty cedar box was still in my closet, but it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. Our family would never be what it was. The happy, unbroken story was gone forever. But we were building something new in its place. Something messier, more complicated and scarred by the fire. But it was honest. And it was ours. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt like it just might be strong enough to last. Of course, I will continue the story, expanding it further to add more depth, detail, and a final sense of closure to the family's journey. The Thanksgiving dinner became an annual benchmark, a quiet measure of our progress. Each year, the silences grew shorter, the laughter a little less forced. My mother's cheerfulness softened into a genuine warmth, and my father learned to speak about his pride in Leo's hard-won sobriety without his voice cracking. Leo himself continued his steady, unglamorous climb. He moved out of the sober living house and into a small apartment of his own. He enrolled in a community college program to become a certified mechanic, discovering a quiet talent for fixing things, for understanding the intricate logic of an engine. It seemed a fitting profession for a man who was slowly and methodically repairing himself. We all fell into a new kind of normal, a peaceful, low-tide state that felt miraculous after the tsunami that had wrecked our lives. I found my own peace in the quiet rhythms of my life. My work, my friends, my Al-Anon meetings, which had become a source of profound strength and fellowship. I learned to separate my brother's illness from the brother himself. 2. Love him without carrying the weight of his choices. The cedar box remained in my closet, but it was no longer a symbol of loss. It held the single precious letter he had returned to me, and it held the purple heart, which I would take out and hold sometimes, feeling the cool, heavy weight of my grandfather's courage in my palm. The restitution money continued to arrive each month, and the balance in the dedicated savings account grew. A silent, accumulating testament to his commitment. I never touched it. It was his money, his atonement, and I didn't feel it belonged to me. The final payment arrived 5 years after his arrest. It came not as a check, but as a notification of a direct deposit, completing the full amount we had estimated so long ago. That evening, Leo called me. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I did," I said. "Leo, you did it. You paid it all back." "Yeah," he said. A long exhale on the other end of the line. "It's done. At least, that part is." An awkward silence fell between us, but it was different now. It wasn't filled with unspoken anger. It was filled with unspoken emotion. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. The question hung in the air. "I don't know," I admitted, and it was the truth. The money was the last ghost, the final, tangible link to the worst time in our lives. "It doesn't feel like my money." "It's not mine either," he said quickly. "It never was. Paying it back, that was for me, Clara, not for you. It was my proof that I could finish something, that I could fix something." He paused. "But now it's just sitting there. It feels wrong." He was right. The money was a loose thread, a piece of unfinished business. As long as it sat there, a memorial to his betrayal, our family story would feel stuck on that painful chapter. "I have an idea," I said slowly, a thought taking shape in my mind. "But I can't do it alone. I need your help." For the first time since before the intervention, I drove to his apartment. He now lived in a small but immaculately clean unit above a garage. Tools were neatly organized on a pegboard on one wall. He had built a new life for himself, one based on order and discipline. He made us coffee, and we sat at his small kitchen table. I pushed a bank statement across the table to him. "This is what you paid back," I said. "Plus interest. I want to give it back to you, Leo. Use it for a down payment on a house, to open your own garage. Use it to build your future. The debt is paid. You don't owe me anything anymore." I watched him as he looked at the number on the page. The old Leo, the boy with the shifty eyes and the desperate hunger, would have snatched it in a heartbeat. He would have seen it as a windfall, a jackpot, a quick fix. But the man sitting across from me was not that boy. He looked at the paper for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he slid it back across the table to me. "No," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I can't take that, Clara. Taking that would feel like I'm undoing all the work. Like I'm taking back the apology. I have to build my own future with my own 2 hands. It's the only way it will be real. The only way I'll believe I deserve it." He looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. "But I agree with you. We can't let it just sit there. It's tainted money. We have to clean it." "How?" I asked. "By doing what Mom wanted," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first time I had seen his genuine, untroubled smile in more than a decade. "We use it to keep the story safe, but not just our story, other people's. And so, we started our project, together. It took us almost another year. We used the restitution money to establish a new non-profit fund. We called it the Cedar Box Grant. Its mission was simple: to provide small, immediate, no questions asked grants to the families of addicts who had just entered residential treatment. It was money for the things no one ever thinks about: the rent that's suddenly overdue, the car payment that will be missed, the groceries the kids will need while a parent is getting help. It was a fund to patch the holes that addiction rips in the fabric of a family. It was a safety net, but not the kind that enables a fall. It was the kind that appears after the fall has already happened, after rock bottom has been hit, to help the family survive the impact. We designed the website ourselves. We wrote the mission statement. We created the application process. We worked together, side by side, every Tuesday night at my kitchen table. We argued over phrasing. We celebrated small victories. We slowly, carefully, rebuilt the bridge between us. The foundation of our new relationship was built on this shared purpose. Last week, we awarded our first grant. It was to a young woman whose husband, a construction worker, had just entered a 90-day rehab program for an opioid addiction. She had 2 small children, and she was about to be evicted. Our grant paid her rent for the next 3 months, giving her a small pocket of breathing room, a chance to find her footing while her husband began his own long, difficult climb. She sent us a short, tearful email of thanks. "You didn't just save our home," she wrote. "You saved our hope." This evening, I stood in my living room, looking at the mantelpiece. The purple heart sat in its place of honor. Beside it was the old cedar box. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was the single folded love letter my father had written to my mother. And next to it was a new piece of paper. It was a copy of the letter from the woman we had just helped. I placed it carefully inside. The box was no longer a reliquary for a lost past. It was a living thing, a testament to the fact that stories don't have to end in tragedy. The things my brother sold are gone forever, and the scars of that betrayal will always be a part of our family's history. But we have learned that the most precious heirlooms are not the things we inherit. They are the things we build together out of the wreckage. We had taken the ugliest chapter of our lives and turned it into a story of hope for someone else. My mother had asked me to keep our story safe, and I finally understood. The only way to truly keep a story safe is to keep it going. Of course, I will continue the story further, expanding on the years that followed and bringing the family's journey to its ultimate conclusion. The Cedar Box grant became the quiet, steady rhythm of our lives. The work was a constant, a purpose that Leo and I shared, a neutral ground where we could meet as partners. Each successful grantor family's rent paid, a car repaired, so a mother could get to her job, a set of new clothes for children whose parent was starting over, was a small act of repair on our own fractured history. We were taking the ugliest, most painful event of our lives and systematically transforming it into a force for good. It was a quiet, thankless kind of work, done through paperwork and phone calls, but it felt more real and more important than anything I had ever done. Years passed. 5, then 7, then 10. The world kept turning and our family, miraculously, turned with it. Leo, now a decade sober, became the man he was always meant to be before the addiction burrowed its way into his soul. He finished his mechanic certification at the top of his class and, with a small, carefully saved for business loan from a bank, opened his own small garage. He specialized in restoring classic cars, a skill he had learned from our father but had never had the discipline to pursue. He poured his new, hard-won focus into the work. His hands, once shaky and desperate, now steady and sure as they brought rusted, forgotten machines back to life. He met a woman, a kind veterinarian named Megan, who knew his whole story, and loved him not in spite of it, but because of the strength it had taken him to survive it. They married, and soon had a daughter of their own. My own life flourished in the absence of chaos. Michael and I married. Our daughter, Lily, grew from a laughing baby into a bright, curious teenager with my mother's green eyes. Our parents eased into a gentle, quiet retirement, their faces softened by time, and the profound relief of seeing their children whole and happy. The 4 of us, and now our own growing families, would gather for holidays and birthdays. The old tension was gone, replaced by a comfortable, lived-in peace. The past was always there, of course, an invisible guest at every table, but it was no longer a monster. It was just a scar, a reminder of a wound that had, against all odds, healed. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic when Lily, now 14, came up to join me. She sat on an old trunk, watching me sort through photo albums and relics of my past. Her eyes fell on the cedar box, which I now kept on a high shelf in my office. "Mum," she said, her voice full of the casual curiosity of a teenager. "What's the real story of that box?" I had told her the simple version. Of course, that it held special things from her great-grandmother. But she was older now, with a perceptive gaze that missed nothing. She knew there was more to it. I paused, a dusty photo album in my hands. I looked at my daughter, at her intelligent, questioning face, and I knew it was time. The only way to truly keep the story safe was to pass it on honestly and completely. "Come on," I said, leading her downstairs. I took the box from the shelf and placed it on the dining room table between us. The scent of cedar, faint and sweet, filled the air. I opened the lid and piece by piece, I told her everything. I showed her the Purple Heart and told her about her great-grandfather, a hero who had saved his friends. I showed her the single yellowed letter and told her about the beautiful love story of the grandparents she'd never met. And then I took a deep breath, and I told her the hard part. I told her about her Uncle Leo's illness, about the darkness that had taken hold of him. I told her about the day I came home to find the box empty, and the soul-crushing search that followed. I told her about the intervention, about the police, about the terrible, gut-wrenching choice I had to make. I told her about the family breaking, and the slow, painful years of putting it back together. I didn't spare myself. I told her about my anger, my coldness, my own part in the family's dysfunction. And then I showed her the last document in the box, the charter for the Cedar Box grant. I explained how her uncle had paid back every cent, and how we had decided together to turn that money, that symbol of our family's greatest pain, into a source of hope for others. Lily listened in silence, her eyes wide, taking it all in. She traced the dent on the silver locket I'd managed to buy back from a collector years ago. When I was finished, the room was quiet, filled only with the sound of the rain against the window panes. I held my breath, worried that I had burdened her with too much, that I had tarnished her image of her uncle, of her family. She finally looked up at me, her expression serious and thoughtful. "So, Uncle Leo didn't break the story," she said, her voice soft. "He just added a really sad chapter. And then you and he wrote a better one at the end." Her simple, profound wisdom brought tears to my eyes. She understood. She saw the whole picture, the shame and the grace, the wound and the healing. The cycle of pain had ended here. She would not inherit our secrets or our sorrows, only our truth. The next day, our whole family gathered at my parents' house for our regular Sunday dinner. The house was filled with the chaotic, happy noise of a family that had learned to live with its ghosts. I watched as Leo knelt on the floor, patiently showing my nephew how to fix a broken toy truck, his large, capable hands gentle and sure. I watched Lily sit beside him, showing him a funny video on her phone, their heads bent together, sharing an easy laugh. There was no fear between them, no shadows. He was just her uncle, a man she loved, a man with a sad chapter in his story, but a man who had written a better ending. I caught my father's eye from across the room, and he gave me a small, knowing smile. We had made it. We were on the other side. My mother's wish had come true, but in a way none of us could have ever imagined. The story she had entrusted to me wasn't a fragile collection of objects to be locked away and protected from the world. It was a living, breathing thing. It was strong enough to be broken and rebuilt. It was a foundation, tested by fire and flood, a foundation that was now strong enough for our children, and their children, to build upon. The box was no longer a burden. It was a map. It was the story of how we had navigated our way through the wreckage and found our way back home. Of course, I will add one final chapter to the story, a concluding epilogue that looks upon the family's completed journey. That night, after our family dinner, after my parents had gone to bed, and Leo had driven home to his own family, I found myself drawn back to my office. The house was quiet, filled with the gentle, sleeping breaths of my husband and my daughter. The rain had stopped, and the moon cast a pale, clean light through the window. I took the cedar box down from its shelf. It felt different in my hands now, not heavy with grief or anger, but with the dense, solid weight of a complete story. I sat at my desk and opened the lid, the familiar scent of cedar filling the quiet room. I laid out the contents, one by one on the dark wood of the desk, creating a timeline of our family's fall and rise. There was the purple heart, a symbol of a sacrifice I could only imagine, the beginning of our family's legacy of quiet strength. There was my father's love letter, the testament to a love that had built our world. There was the tear-stained letter of thanks from the first woman we had helped, a testament to a new beginning. And there was the charter for the Cedar Box grant, the legal document that had transformed our pain into a purpose. It was a strange collection, a history of war and love, of betrayal and forgiveness, of destruction and rebuilding. I thought of the items that were missing, the locket and the dog tags and the other small trinkets, scattered and lost forever. For years, their absence had felt like a phantom limb, a constant, dull ache. But tonight, I felt no sense of loss. The items had never been the point. They were just vessels for the story, and the story had survived. It had survived because it was strong enough to be broken. My brother's addiction, his great betrayal, had been a fire that had raged through our family. It had burned away all the pretense, all the polite fictions, all the comfortable lies we had told ourselves. It had burned us down to the foundation, and it had forced us to see what we were really made of. In the smouldering wreckage, we had been given a choice, to abandon the ruins or to build something new upon them. I was so grateful, with a gratitude that felt as deep and solid as the earth, that we had chosen to build. My husband, Michael, had taken a photo that afternoon in my parents' backyard. It was a candid shot. My father was showing my nephew how to properly hold a football. My mother was laughing, her head thrown back, at something Megan, Leo's wife, had said. Leo and I were standing together, watching the kids, and he had his arms slung casually and comfortably over my shoulder. Lily was in the foreground, making a funny face at the camera. It was a picture of a normal family on a normal Sunday. There was nothing extraordinary about it, except that for us, it was a miracle. It was the after. I had printed the photo that evening. I picked it up from my desk now and looked at the smiling, imperfect, resilient faces of the people I loved. I slid it into the cedar box, placing it gently on top of all the other documents. It was the final chapter. The story was complete. I closed the lid. The soft click of the latch echoed in the quiet room. It was not an act of hiding the past away. It was an act of acceptance. This was our story in its entirety. The beautiful and the ugly, the heroic and the shameful, the joy and the sorrow. I had not failed my mother. Her request, I finally understood, was never about guardianship of a few old things. It was a test of stewardship. She had been asking me to be the keeper of our family's soul, to be the one strong enough to navigate it through the fire, and to ensure it survived. I placed the box back on the high shelf. It was no longer a source of pain, a project, to be worked on, or a burden to be carried. It was a book that had been written, and now it was time to place it on the shelf and read other stories. I turned off the light in my office, leaving the box and its ghosts to the quiet moonlight. From the living room, I could hear the faint sound of Michael's soft snoring, and Lily turning over in her sleep. My family, my home, my peace. I went to join them, leaving the past behind me, and walked into the simple, beautiful, and blessedly ordinary present.